So it looks like we are live, and this is going to be my first of perhaps many lives. Excuse the quality on this first one since I just wanted to do a test run to see what the setup would actually be like and how good the quality would be, how good the audio would be, and also about screen share functionality and this kind of thing. I think in this case, I actually need an encoder or something of that sort in order to be able to properly do this stream with sharing like resources that I might be looking at or other kinds of things that might show up as well. So, um, today's theme is going to be about privacy and security in the age of AI. I think actually it's a very underrepresented part of the discussions that are happening. I think mostly because people are so afraid of how the job market will change as a result of AI that it's doesn't seem to be an important discussion that people are having. I'm very lucky enough that I had a close person in my life bring up the topic of privacy today with local AI installations, which I thought was an interesting kind of solution to data that is necessary to keep private, like in hospital institutions, like in law institutions, etc., which I'm sure that people are just dumping into a cloud-based system like Claude and then just not even putting it in private mode and then leaking all of that data for future model training. So this is a very important topic because we're legally bound by it. And at some point, most, at least the United States, was really, um, it was a really kind of a question that was unanswered, right? How much privacy versus how much security is appropriate? And I think in the last couple decades, especially, we've clearly made a decision as a public or through non-action a decision that our privacy is not as important as security is, which, I will just leave up to the viewer to make a decision as to whether that actually makes sense or not. But in the current state of things, it doesn't really seem like we have the same freedoms that our previous generation had as a result, which is kind of unfortunate. This is kind of like a random associated kind of story, but I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas a few years ago. Maybe it was a year ago or something like that. And I went with my family, which was really awesome. I'd been there before. Actually, there's a really amazing pizza place. I think it's called Grateful Dead or something like that. And they butter their crusts with real butter, and the cheese is really good. Anyways, I went there with my family, and I was looking at the history of the town because Hot Springs, Arkansas, is a spot where athletes from around the nation, way back in the day, like I think it was like early 1900s, uh, would go for recovery. So they would go to train and they would go use the hot springs because they were very mineral rich. There were lots of Native American tribes. It was a meeting point for Native American tribes, I believe, because of the healing properties of the water. And then the government stepped in and started um, started regulating the access to the water. So this is really unfortunate because I guess for a long time people would just go there and shower in the natural hot springs, take a bath or whatever. And now all of a sudden, in order to even have access, you would need to go to a bathhouse or you would need to basically need the government's permission in order to go, take a bath in healing waters, which were a birthright, I guess, of the people, native population there for, I think thousands of years at that point. So really interesting, very interesting. And what ended up happening as a solution, because there were riots about this, there were people, there were lots of people who wanted to use the healing waters, but maybe didn't have the money. These towns around the major hot spring kind of downtown area were created for people who felt like they could wanted to enjoy it regardless of the government's control and they didn't want to pay the government, this kind of thing. And there was a lot of back and forth, I think, in terms of these people trying to take baths for free and then the government not wanting them to do so. Eventually, and it's noted like this in the history actually, which I think is fascinating. Eventually, the solution was that the government turned a blind eye to the actual like non-governmental regulated usage uh, in a specific area actually of hot springs. So the solution wasn't like, oh, let's come up with the perfect rule set here for us to actually move forward, or force a situation or an outcome for every single person involved. The actual solution was the government intentionally turned a blind eye. And that's not really how software works. Software doesn't actually operate with this like blind eye mentality situation, right? So it operates more so with a very distinct set of rules. And so in a sense, software is like the best rule keeper or the most vigilant rule keeper ever. But creating like, oh, we just don't look that way or something like that is not how software is conceived of. It's not how it's built. It's not how the people who build it think of it either. So I don't think that solution is going to appear in privacy and security when it comes to our lives on the internet, which have consumed all of our lives. I mean, I'm on the internet almost all of the time. Um, aside from like when I'm like going out or trying to do something else outside of my house. But when I'm at home, especially if I'm not hanging out with somebody or spending time with a loved one or something like that, I'm going to be probably on the internet doing something for myself or for the business or for whatever. So, this is a big part of our lives, and knowing that the government can't actually turn blind eye when the data is freely available, and the basis of the internet is a rule-based system of uh, consistent methodologies of execution, right? It's not like, oh, we were soft on this one and then we're hard on this one. It's like, no, it's consistent and its behavior across all cases with deterministic systems. I'll just leave that as a caveat because that doesn't apply to LLMs necessarily. Um, we I lost my train of thought. Where was I? Oh, so yes, back the internet cannot just like turn a blind eye to cases unless we embed that, and then everybody will know. So probably people will say, "Hey, why are you turning a blind eye to them?" Like all that kind of stuff, and that will just result in the continual constriction of whatever kind of looking away process that the government has committed itself to in order to solve a problem. So, where does that leave us with security or privacy, actually? We'll get to security separately because I think it's somewhat of a different topic. Well, when it comes to privacy, we cannot rely on a government body to look out for that for us because they're not incentivized to provide privacy. They're incentivized for order and control. The really easy example of this is money, right? So, being in a cash based society is wonderful. Of course, people abuse it in some cases where they underdeclare the amount of earnings that they might have if they earn in cash, so they don't have to pay taxes on that, etc. Um, but there are trillions of dollars that kind of fit that category of transactions that happen in cash that are not taxed. And if you're looking at the government debt in the United States, I think it's like $1 trillion, something like that. It's a lot of money. But when you're looking at taxable, untaxed transactions that could be taxable if they were just put on some sort of automatic ledger system, like a credit card, like a cryptocurrency, etc., that money gets wiped out pretty fast. So um, when you look at the government and how it would look at all of those transactions, it could easily say, well, yeah, we looked away from that for a period of time, but we need that money now. So we're just going to start figuring out a way to force everybody to transact only with digital currencies. And, whether you believe that is the right thing or the wrong thing for the government to do, there's not really an easy way to go back from that. Once it's done, it's kind of going to be like that. And then for like participation in society is going to be much more kind of congealed. It's going to be much more fixed in uh, how we need to abide to the rules and what those consequences of the rules are going to be. So there's a certain amount of freedom that will like definitely be lost in that scenario. So if we look at money as an archetypal example of what we would likely see on the internet, well, what kind of behaviors and activities happen on the internet that are allowed essentially from anonymity? And that could be all sorts of really horrible things like adult content that was not consented to. It could be selling illicit substances. It could be all sorts of stuff like that that is just so terrible and so horrible. And when the government looks at that, well, what's the purpose for somebody to even have privacy on the internet if it can result in all of these negative things? Now, I will give you a counterpoint as to why privacy is really important. And the reason why is because privacy gives people an opportunity to be entitled to their own opinions without public recourse. And the reason why this is important is because, as we see in a lot of organizations and big companies, there's a tendency to agree as a survival impulse as part of human biology. So when you look at uh, when you look at people who are voting, they often vote in kind of alignment with their family, because people talk, right? People talk to each other. They don't want to be ostracized from their community. They don't want to be removed from their situation because our caveman brains believe that if we are exiled or we are disagreed with and removed from a tribe, that we will not survive and we will die. So from thousands of years of evolution, cooperation was how humans survived for many, many years. But in a modern society, in a political landscape where people are supposed to have their own opinions from their own experience, their own lived experience, um, that kind of mechanism is actually counterproductive for trying to get at the truth of how people think, feel, and what they actually believe and want, which is important for people who are in the political arena to understand so they can cater to that. Now, if we just have a situation where people are going and they are voting in line, they're having opinions in line with the people that they are surrounded with simply because they are afraid of being removed from the group, not because they actually believe that or actually think that. We are in for a world of hurt because all that happens in that situation is the loudest person, the person with the most charisma, the person who is willing to stand out the most and in like get a group to buy into an opinion is going to have the authority and the opinion and be able to move multiple people to have the same opinion, which is how humans naturally work. But in a truly democratic society where everybody's say has an equal value, or it's supposed to, at least in the voting process for who we choose to represent ourselves, then we're in for a world of hurt because we are not truly living in that kind of, I guess you could say, ideal of democracy. So there is value to privacy because when privacy is allowed, the truth of who people are, what they think, how they behave, all of that kind of stuff comes out. Human nature comes out. And some of that is really dirty and ugly and sad and disgusting. But some of that also is beautiful, right? Like, can a truly creative person be able to create if they're just constantly being criticized and vilified by their environment? A really strong-willed one can, but I'm sure that there are more sensitive creatives out there that if they just had space and they didn't have the push and pull of the people around them and they could really kind of tune into their own system, could probably create amazing things. So just to give you some insight as to why privacy is important. So it's got pros and cons to it, right? And on one side, you could say that not having any privacy and everybody being who they are, saying exactly what they think and all this kind of stuff is possible. But again, I just don't think that tribal dynamics really allow people to express themselves freely. and truly, with the way that the human brain is naturally wired. So it's very likely from that we will move into a place where, at least for a short period of time, I think privacy will be basically dead. And it kind of has been for a while. I think back in the day, if you look around 20 years ago on the internet, you see people completely anonymously, like communicating with each other, getting to know each other on forums and chat boards and this kind of thing. And now most people's attention is on social media. Social media is automatically linked to a person, um, who has a specific form, and that is is antithetical, right? Because you have the person, you have their name. Probably they're leaking tons of information about themselves on on their social media profile anyways. So they're identifiable as to there are more pieces of information that are identifiable or can be linked to a specific person. So that, and then, of course, you have IP addresses and you have all of this other stuff like, network and DNS, and you can find out where people are by their IP address and this kind of stuff. So, we don't really live in a kind of situation where privacy is really respected on the internet now. Most people don't seem to care. It seems like it's generally the trajectory that we will have no privacy. So we will need for government regulation to come in if we want this to be a thing. So until we decide as a people, as a group, as individuals, that privacy is really important, these are the contexts where it's really important. We want the government to implement this, because otherwise we will not choose this candidate, or however it works in your country. Maybe you riot or whatever. It's just not likely to happen, to be honest. So I guess, like, the kind of sad thing is we should probably get ready for a world where privacy is not really going to be a thing. And that kind of dovetails into a second part, which is your internet presence is your storefront nowadays. So, even for people who have like a normal 9 to 5 corporate job, their internet presence is their resume. It's going to be their LinkedIn profile. It's going to be all of these online assets that are necessary for them to be able to get and retain jobs. So they already have one. But for people who are freelancers or actually building a real kind of full fledged business, those people are going to need to divulge information about themselves, right? People want to see a face. They want to be given an energy. They want to be able to connect personally with brand, and with the type of person that is espousing the products and services that they are selling. So it's already kind of out the door from that perspective as well, privacy. So, where does privacy actually really, really, really matter? Where does it really matter? Where does it really matter? And, we can say medical records it seems to be a place that people that feel privacy is very important. And, other kinds of governmental records that are, um, typically unavailable for some person just requesting information about another person. So those kinds of records seem to be kind of in a category where they are private, but for how long? Because when we look at the amount of data that is being harvested on individual people from Meta, you're on all of their platforms, you're sending text messages on their platforms, you're sending messages on their platforms, you're posting on their platforms, you're putting pictures and videos on platforms owned by Google and Meta. There's a lot of evidence over the last couple decades that the phones are essentially listening to us even when they're off, because all you have to do is have a conversation around your phone, or send a few text messages to some people that you know about something that you're thinking about, and all of a sudden your news feed looks different, the advertisements that you're being sent are looking different, etc. And yeah, maybe that could be from the places that you're clicking around, etc., on these platforms, or the kind of content that you're engaging more with. But That's a lot of information to harvest about somebody, like I don't know, when I go into a store, I would prefer if even if they have cameras to like not save that, oh, and this type of person with this kind of face and he's in this age range and he touched these products or something like that. It just seems like a kind of invasion of me being able to live my life. But on the other side, that has also provided a huge opportunity for products to be sold and marketed in a way that is, that tailors to the consumer better than it ever has. So, pros and cons. Again, pros and cons with all of this stuff for sure. So, looking at these kinds of things, we can kind of see that privacy is mostly dead. And perhaps we can bring it back. There will need to be government intervention in order for that to happen, and that would have to be like a group effort. But what kind of situations could end up um, forcing kind of this situation with privacy? Well, it would have to be, and this is kind of the sad part, I think, it would just have to be kind of like a catastrophic event in the news that causes it. So it's like, okay, this store got so much data about this person or whatever, and then a person was able to look through their file. Like, it's just eventually the leakage of data has to result in a negative outcome that the news actually takes on and then distributes amongst people to see, for people to get outraged enough that this is a possibility. And also, I would say that the news or the media that covers these kinds of situations, they would also need to point out that what the core problem is actually, right? Because if it's like, well, this happened because this type of person did it, or this happened because there was a leakage of data that allowed this kind of situation to occur, then I think that the privacy discussion can actually happen, which would be really powerful. Now, for me personally, I think privacy is really beautiful. I think it's very important. Not everybody needs to know what I'm up to, or it's actually distracting for a lot of people. I think in a lot of cases, to know too much information about you, even in just a normal conversation, if somebody is just working with me because they want an outcome, they don't necessarily care about this vacation that I went on. They don't care about how my cat is doing. They don't care that I like forgot to water one of my plants and it died. And they might think it's funny and they might think that that's cute or endearing, but they don't actually think that that's an important piece of information for their life or the project. So we are constantly leaking way too much information, and I think that, for the people that we interact with, like, some level of privacy is good. It's good for them, so that way they can stay focused on what they're doing. It's good for me, so that way I don't overexpose myself in a way that's not helpful for other people, and it's also good for being able to say an opinion, to say a real opinion that is not just the opinion of the people around you, but is something that you really feel is true based on your life experience. So that is the most important thing. And, just because somebody is charismatic and can really speak well and has a lot to say doesn't mean that their opinion is necessarily any more valid than somebody who's quiet and somebody who's more introverted or has trouble speaking, you know? Like, they might not be that off the mark. They might actually be totally on the mark about something, but because of their meekness, because of the way they present themselves, because of their speaking ability, they cannot actually be heard by the people around them. And I think that is very sad. So there you go, right? Privacy, the ability to divorce the opinion even from the person that's saying it. I also think that like there are a lot of things in society that are kind of looked down. I don't think we necessarily need to live in this like amazing, purely integrated society where, all of these people who are on the fringe are accepted as part of the tapestry of life. I think it's okay to have a society that frowns upon things and looks upon certain things as good. I don't necessarily believe that myself. I think that you know, I think very differently probably than how the mainstream orients itself. But I think it's okay to have a society like that. So when we look at that as a necessary piece of understanding um, our society and how it's structured, well, if we don't need to integrate everything into mainstream society, some level of privacy around transactions and behavior is good, right? Like, people don't need to know that you stayed at this hotel, you know? Some people, like, even if it's just to mitigate jealousy of other people, right? Maybe you just wanna have a quiet life, you earned good money over the course of your life. You don't need to be overly exposed that you worked really hard for, like, 4 or 5 decades, and you saved your a lot of money, and now you can lead, like, a really wealthy life. You don't People don't need to know that. They don't need to know that if you don't need them to know that. So, or even that, um, yeah, maybe that there's like a product that you use that you know that really helps you. It's associated with a brand that is a lot of people view very negatively, but you like the product. You think it's a good product, and the other association is meaningless to you. Why do people need to know that you are using that? It's another piece of the privacy puzzle. And so that also brings in the necessity for privacy for other things as well. So privacy for your ability to do transactions. Like, why does my credit card provider need to know all of these, payment things that I'm doing, with these kinds of brands or whatever? Why does my why does my phone need to know my current location, you know? Like, I just wanna be left alone so I can enjoy this completely freely without it being, like, monitored and observed by so that way I can get better options later. It's just at a certain point, it's just completely unnecessary. So, privacy is important to avoid harassment in a sense, right? To avoid harassment by governmental bodies, by other people that you don't want to interact with or you don't want them to really know who you are, etc. So privacy becomes important from that angle as well. So, as much as I have spoken earlier in the video that things look to be going in the direction of total openness when it comes to internet presence, there's still tons of value to being able to be completely private with your life, private with how things get expressed out and from your life into the digital world, and to the government agencies and bodies, etc. So, we've talked a little bit about values going in either direction, I guess, and we also talked a little bit about how privacy would be brought back into the fray, which would be basically a catastrophe happening, I guess, in the public related to privacy that causes people to think really deeply about privacy and realize its value and its importance. I would prefer that it doesn't happen that way. I would really like it if we could just recognize that it's important now and not need to make it a thing that we handle later. But again, this is kind of the world that we live in, so I'm not going to hold my hopes up too high for that. Now, let's talk about what to do from here and how privacy is going to be tailored into AI going forward and where it will be important and where it won't be important. So, in general, I think that privacy is going to be a major consideration for organizations going forward, um, who are using AIs. So, especially if they have lots of proprietary data, because I think that most people's competitive advantage in the future market is going to be how much data do they have that no one has access to. So, this is the real meat and potatoes of this talk, kind of like putting it all together towards the end here. If I don't go on for another 10 or 20 minutes after, but essentially, we're going to be looking at um, yeah, how much private data can somebody silo and then train independent local models that are not associated with the cloud whatsoever? So that way it never gets cloud exposure, which is the most important thing, um, in order to deliver an AI-ified product or service. So this is going to be really interesting. So for big companies will start to care a lot about privacy because that will enable them to hold a competitive advantage for longer. And there are many companies that have lots of private data. There are also lots of public data that's available as well. That's all. If you have private data for a specific niche, that's going to be valuable because that's how you generate real insight into that market. So privacy will be important there. People will likely use local AIs, or they will use AI for organizations like Azure or Microsoft Cloud services or this kind of thing, that guarantee a certain level of security or like risk mitigate the liability of data getting leaked. But you know, this is also something that I've experienced over the course of my career. If it goes onto the cloud, it is not secure. As far as I'm concerned, if it's something that is directly accessible on a cloud platform somewhere, it is so easy for somebody to change a security setting. It is so easy for anything to happen that could just suddenly expose your data totally by accident. So, and sometimes things can sit with open access for a long period of time before somebody realizes, oh, if I just change this path URL or I do something else here in the console, now I have access to all this stuff without needing an account to log in, or anything like that. So that stuff happens. It does happen. It happens even to experienced teams, like, of course, if they prioritize that data security, it's very, very, very unlikely to happen. But every additional step that you can take in security, is going to result in a higher percentage chance of like your data not being leaked or the things that you care about not being leaked into a public setting that somebody could take advantage of or use. And local AI is one of the best ways to do that, right? If you don't even need cloud access, cut the internet completely, no data packets going back and forth between your laptop, or the like server in another place, then you know for sure that that will likely not be leaked. The only other pathway would be somebody would have to pull that manually off of that drive and then send it somewhere. So, it just cuts the options. And I always view security personally as a layered approach. Now, um, the other kind of person that will take privacy very seriously, are going to be people who are essentially targets for attention. Now, that could be high net worth individuals. It might be political activists. It could be something that is a source of value or that creates friction for a powerful entity. So those kinds of people are also going to care about privacy, and then the other major place is where privacy is protected by law. That's another place because then people take on a legal liability if they ignore that, and it can be really dire, career ruining, or end up ruining your life potentially, right? Which would be terrible and something that most people would want to avoid. Uh, the law tends to be a pretty the law with consequence tends to be a pretty good way to limit behavior in a certain way. So those three parties are going to be really looking at ways to maintain their privacy and their data security online, even though they're individuals. So there is going to be a market for people who want to stay completely private. There always has been on the internet. It's not necessarily the easiest for a user who is non-technical to really understand or test completely, but there will be demand and there is demand in the market for that, for those kinds of people. So, um, I guess one other way that we can look at it is that privacy for the right people who really care about it, who it's important for their well-being and safety, and their ability to live comfortably in the world. They that market will always be there. There's going to be products and services for that. And so it's not going to go completely away, but it's not going to be part of the mainstream discourse. It's going to be for fringe people, essentially, right? Because how many people are so high net worth that they're automatically a target, so famous that they're automatically a target, so politically active that they're automatically a target, etc. It's not that common. So there's going to be a few people, of course, they're going to value it tremendously because it's going to be so important for them. So, to summarize the talk, privacy is going to go away from the main discourse that we're currently having unless there's a crazy accident or problem that occurs, which could surely happen. God forbid, but if it happens, hopefully we can correct it in the way that makes the most sense, and is the most helpful for the maximum amount of people. And it will go away from that discourse, at least temporarily, until some kind of emergency crisis or situation happens like that. It will stay for large organizations who need their data to be proprietary in order to maintain their competitive advantage. And it will also stay for fringe people on the fringe of society who need the privacy in order to stay protected and keep their peace, and be able to do the work that they are inclined to do without interference or without being stopped or without being imprisoned, I guess, if um, what they're doing is putting them in that kind of position, even if they are doing it in order to expose a corrupt government or this kind of thing. So there will always be a segment of products and services that are available for privacy. You'll just have to dig into that and figure it out and use it. Things like local AIs, especially as kind of technology progresses, and then it will be big installations, big private installations potentially, or maybe even just like local AIs for super big companies who want to protect their data, like cut their liability down. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's not going to be really that important for most people. But just to leave you with some kind of food for thought, generally the things that are brought into mainstream that are here now, a lot of them were from fringe characters. They were from fringe people doing work that was not looked at as correct or the most important work, or kind of there it was work looked at as high friction work, like um that of integration that was done by Dr. Martin Luther King. Like these kinds of people, they were kind of fringe characters, they weren't the normal run of the mill person. And a lot of what is in society now is built by those kinds of people. So it's very likely that we could see it become something that's really important on the fringe, become something that is magnified and important for a certain group of people, and that get brought into the mainstream because of the influence of that group of people. So just to leave you with that kind of last bit of philosophical kind of knowledge, I guess you could say. And thanks so much for taking a look at this video. If you really enjoyed it, you can, check out smaller things like this video on my Instagram. If you just like little updates about how AI and technology and digital transformation is all kind of working in tangent with each other, through this very uncertain time of AI. Or if you're interested, you can actually visit my website, and you can check out kind of projects that I've worked on. And if you like the work that I do, you think it could apply to a project that you have, the mindsets, the kinds of philosophies, the energy that I can bring to the project is something you feel like would make your project successful, then go ahead and send me a DM on Instagram, and I would love to talk to you about it and see how we could potentially partner and make the world a better place, because that's what I would like to do. So, anyways, lots of love. Thanks for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next live stream soon. Peace. Now I just need to figure out how to turn this off. Okay, here we go. Bye bye.